The garage sale wasn't even supposed to happen that day. It had rained all morning and most of the afternoon, turning the neighborhood streets into a cold maze of puddles and leaf-covered asphalt. But as the clouds began to part and the final drizzle faded into steam rising off the sidewalks, Jeremy found himself wandering past a faded cardboard sign taped to a lamppost. Multifamily sale, everything must go. He hadn't planned on stopping. He almost didn't, but curiosity was a silent tug. And the road he walked every day to clear his head now had something new on it. Something different. He turned down the street with his hood still up and hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. He'd always liked Call of Duty Zombies. Not just liked it, he lived inside it. Ever since he was 12, he'd been obsessed with the eerie atmosphere of the maps, the weird alternate history lore, the cryptic voices, and the slow unraveling of some bizarre broken world hidden under the surface of a shooter game. His favorite character had always been Richtofen, manic, intelligent, unpredictable. There was something about his voice that felt alive more than the others. He used to mimic his lines in front of the mirror, half laughing, half creeped out. Now, at 17, Jeremy didn't do that anymore. Not out loud, but late at night, when the rest of the house was silent and all he could hear was the hum of the monitor and the soundtrack of Dries. He still mouthed, along with Richtofen's twisted monologues. In some small way, it felt like the only time his mind was fully turned on. The house with the garage sale was older, with peeling blue paint and a yard overrun with weeds. An older man with a sun-leathered face sat in a plastic chair near a folding table stacked with mismatched electronics, DVD players, VCRs, tangled cords, a cracked laptop missing its power button. It was the kind of junk Jeremy usually ignored, except for the corner of a black console peeking from underneath a stack of tangled wires. His heart gave a small jolt. He stepped closer and pulled the wires away, like unwrapping a fossil. It was a PlayStation 3, the older, fatter model, the kind people online still whispered about because of its backward compatibility and hidden features. Jeremy picked it up and turned it over in his hands. It was scratched, but intact. The disc tray still clicked open with a solid thunk. But what caught his attention wasn't the machine's condition. It was the sticker. On the underside, barely visible through the scuffs and dust, was a small circular sticker, matte black, with an embossed red symbol pressed into the surface. It wasn't a company logo or warranty seal. It didn't look corporate at all. It looked handmade. At first glance, the symbol resembled a crude fusion between the number 935 and a distorted skull, like something halfway between the group 935 logo from Zombies lore and a medical diagram of a cranium. The red ink shimmered faintly, almost metallic, when it caught the sunlight. Jeremy's fingers hovered over it, but didn't touch. "How much for the PlayStation?" he asked, trying to keep his voice level. The man didn't even look up. 25. Jeremy blinked. 25. Yep, the man grunted. Don't know if it works. Belonged to my son. Don't want it here anymore. Jeremy hesitated. Something about the way the man said don't want it here didn't sit right. But $25 for a PS3? Even if it didn't work, he could strip it for parts. Maybe flip it online. He handed over the bills and tucked the console under his arm. The man didn't say thank you. Jeremy walked home faster than usual. The sky had gone from pale gray to bruised purple. He tried not to think about the symbol on the bottom of the console, but it stuck in his head like a splinter. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd seen it somewhere before, maybe in a Zombies Easter egg or an obscure YouTube lore video from years ago. But no specific memory surfaced. Just unease. When he got home, the house was empty. His mom was working late again, third shift at the nursing home. Jeremy liked it that way. Could be alone, uninterrupted. He dropped his backpack by the door, ignored the pile of dishes in the sink, and carried the console to his room. Dust drifted from the vents as he turned the machine over one last time before plugging it in. The sticker was still there, staring back at him like an eye. He briefly considered peeling it off, but something stopped him. Instead, he set the PS3 down gently, connected the power cable, and slid the HDMI into the back of his monitor. It took longer than expected to boot up. For a moment, he thought it might be dead after all. Then the screen flickered, once, twice, and the startup sound echoed through the speakers. distorted and slow, like it was underwater. That should have been his first warning. The home screen appeared, but it was off. The icons were slightly misaligned. The time and date were both wrong. It said 1:15 a.m. and the 5th of November 11, which didn't match anything. Jeremy frowned. He navigated to the settings to correct it, but the menu glitched and kicked him back out. Frustrated, he scrolled through the user accounts. There was only one. It was named _935_R. He selected it. The console loaded the main dashboard, and Jeremy felt a chill creep up his spine. The background theme wasn't the usual PS3 wave or default image. It was black, entirely black, with a faint audio loop playing. It sounded like whispering, reversed, layered, and low, almost imperceptible. But there, beneath the whispering, he thought he heard static, then something that might have been laughing. He scrolled through the games. There were only 2 installed: Call of Duty, Black Ops, and Dead Nation. But Black Ops was highlighted automatically, like the system wanted him to open it. He hovered over the icon, then he flipped the console upside down. Just for a second, the symbols still shimmered. That night, for reasons he couldn't explain, he dreamed in German. Jeremy waited until the house was dead silent before he powered the console on again. Something about the earlier boot up had unsettled him, not in a dramatic horror movie kind of way, but in a low, static kind of discomfort, like a song just slightly out of tune. He had chalked it up to the old system being glitchy or modded by the previous owner. That wasn't unusual. People jailbroke PS3s all the time. Maybe the strange startup sounds and mismatched interface were just the result of that. Still, when he clicked the power button a second time and saw the red LED blink to green, he felt a tightness in his throat he couldn't fully explain. The screen turned black. Then, slowly, a faded PlayStation logo appeared, but not the familiar, sharp one he expected. This version looked degraded, as if it had been saved and compressed 100 times over. The resolution was grainy, and the logo wavered as if submerged underwater. It vanished before he could fully process what was wrong with it. Then came the sound, not the normal orchestral swell of the PS3 startup chime. This time, the console let out a low, groaning buzz like the hum of old fluorescent lights or the vibrating moan of a cassette rewinding through warped tape. Jeremy froze in his chair. The noise didn't last long. It cut off in a stuttered snap, replaced by absolute silence. The menu appeared, and it was clearly the PlayStation 3 interface, but aged, rotted somehow. The icons were all there, but desaturated, gray-tinted versions of themselves. The wave pattern background was still moving but slower, almost sluggish, and completely devoid of sound. No navigation clicks, no ambient hum, just oppressive, mechanical silence. Jeremy picked up the controller, which was already plugged in via USB. The battery icon flashed as charging, but he could swear the indicator pulse moved in reverse. He clicked down through the menu, heart thumping heavier now. Under games, he saw what he expected: Call of Duty, Black Ops, already installed. But something was strange about the thumbnail. The usual game icon had been altered. The soldier was still there, hunched over with 2 pistols crossed. But the background was now blood red instead of black, and the soldier's eyes glowed faintly subtle, but wrong. Jeremy moved to launch the game, then paused. Just below the game icon, barely noticeable, was a folder. It hadn't been there before. It was labeled Richtofen_log. The font didn't match anything else on the screen. It wasn't the default PS3 system font. It was jagged, uneven, as if handwritten with trembling fingers. Jeremy tried to click it, but instead of opening, the console buzzed softly and displayed a message: "Access denied, system use only." He frowned. That wasn't a standard message either. Even on jailbroken systems, folders that couldn't be accessed usually just didn't respond or triggered a generic corrupt file alert. This was something else. It's a deliberately programmed response. He scrolled back to the folder and pressed the triangle button, hoping to delete it. The system froze. For 6 seconds, everything was locked: controller, screen, even the PS button. Then, without input, the screen blinked once and returned to the dashboard. This time, however, the folder was pulsing just slightly, like a heartbeat. Jeremy tried again to delete it. This time, instead of freezing, the screen shifted to a black background and a line of text appeared center screen. You must first listen. Then it dumped him back to the main screen. Jeremy stared at the folder, pulse rising. He hovered over it again, finger twitching near the X button. Before he could press anything, the Black Ops icon above it suddenly glitched. Just for a frame, maybe two. It flickered, switching images rapidly like a broken slideshow. Jeremy only caught a glimpse, but in that flash, the icon no longer showed the soldier. It showed a surgical chair, the kind you'd find in an asylum. Restraints on the arms and legs, blood on the floor tiles. Then it flickered back. Soldier with pistols. Red background. Nothing out of place if you hadn't seen the change. Jeremy didn't press anything. He just stared. He reached for his phone to Google Richtofen_log PS3, but no results came up. Not on Reddit. Not on forums. Nothing. It was as if the folder didn't exist anywhere outside his console. He tried turning the console off, hoping a reboot might clear it. The screen faded slowly, too slowly. Just before the power down process completed, a final flash burned into the monitor. A red screen, a distorted face, frozen mid-scream. No text, no context. Then black. The power light turned yellow for a second, then green, then off. Jeremy sat motionless. The image still burned behind his eyes. He told himself it was just a modded system, someone messing around with custom firmware. Easter eggs, maybe a weird fan-made build of zombies. People did this kind of thing all the time. It didn't mean anything. And yet, when he flipped the console over again to feel grounded, his eyes fell on the black sticker with the red symbol still etched into the bottom. For a split second, under the lamplight, he thought he saw it pulse. He blinked. It didn't pulse again. Jeremy didn't sleep that night. He told himself he would, that he'd shut down the console, brush it off as nothing, and crawl into bed like a normal teenager. But he never even left his desk chair. The glow of the monitor bathed the room in a sickly bluish light as the PS3 sat idle, humming softly like a machine half asleep. That folder was still there. Richtofen_log, pulsing faintly every few seconds like the heartbeat of something buried. After hours of sitting in silence, wrestling with anxiety and curiosity in equal measure, Jeremy gave in. He clicked the folder. The screen froze for a brief moment, then glitched in a subtle but unmistakable way, a smear of black across the top right, a horizontal white line blinking just once before the UI corrected itself. Inside the folder was a single file, log_001.wav. That was all. No description, no metadata, not even a timestamp. Just a plain audio file with a generic speaker icon. Jeremy hesitated. He told himself it was just some leftover mod, maybe part of a custom campaign or a fan project. But his hand trembled slightly when he clicked play. At first, there was nothing. Just static. Low and distant, like a radio stuck between stations. He adjusted the volume, unsure if the file was even working. Then came the click of a reel-to-reel machine starting up, mechanical, clunky, unmistakably analog. A few seconds later, a voice emerged. It was a man's voice. German. The accent was thick, unmistakable. The voice sounded like it was speaking into a tin can, distorted and crackling with compression, like it had been recorded decades ago. The man spoke quickly, erratically, laughing between words, switching tones mid-sentence like he was telling a joke that only he understood. Jeremy didn't know German fluently, but he recognized a few words. Schmers, ... objekt noon, double quotes, ... Wieder holen Sie die Presetter, 10 CEs langsam pain, object 9, repeat the procedure, kill it slowly. The voice began to laugh softly at first, then more intensely. It wasn't the kind of laugh you heard in movies. It was uncontrolled, guttural, raw, almost like gagging. Jeremy felt his skin crawl. He leaned closer to the screen, drawn in, despite himself. Then the laughter cut out. The recording went silent for a few seconds. That silence felt louder than anything else, as if it carried something waiting just beyond the edge of the audio. Then came the other sounds. At first, Jeremy didn't recognize them. was like the audio had layered in some kind of background. Ambience wet, slicing noises, hard to define. Then it hit him. Surgical tools. A scalpel being cleaned, a tray being set down, and then the unmistakable squish of tissue being pierced. He didn't want to believe it, but his brain refused to unhear it. The audio was filled with the sounds of a surgical operation, but it wasn't sterile or methodical. It was chaotic. There was breathing heavy and fast in the background. And underneath it all, a rhythmic clatter like someone shaking uncontrollably against restraints. Suddenly, bones snapped. Jeremy flinched. He hadn't realized how close his face was to the speaker until then. The snap was sharp and wet, like a joint being forced the wrong way. Another laugh followed, but this one wasn't the same. It wasn't German. It wasn't even human. It was breathless, gurgling, like someone laughing through a crushed windpipe. And then came the Latin. It started slowly, almost like a chant. A low voice, completely different from the man's earlier. It was monotone, deliberate, whispering syllables Jeremy recognized from the Catholic prayers his grandmother used to mutter during storms. Libra me, Domini, de mort aeterna, ... The voice repeated it, over and over, layering with another one that entered half a beat behind, as if echoing across dimensions. The prayer grew faster, more desperate, as if the speaker was being pulled somewhere while resisting it. A scream cut through, not a sharp one, but long, hollow, full of hopelessness. Jeremy's single quotes us stomach twisted. The entire audio file was just under 4 minutes, but it felt much longer. It ended abruptly, not with a fade-out or a final sound, but with a hard click, like someone had physically stopped the recording. The console didn't return to the main screen. Instead, the monitor held on to the paused speaker icon for an unusually long time, as if the system wasn't sure what to do next. When the screen finally reverted, Jeremy noticed something new. The folder name had changed. It now read Richtofen _log 1/12/12. There were 11 more. He sat back, throat dry, the back of his shirt damp with sweat. He couldn't remember turning on his desk fan, but it was spinning now, pushing air across the room in low mechanical groans that suddenly felt too similar to the ambient worry in the audio. His skin itched. His ears rang. For a long time, Jeremy didn't move. His hand rested on the controller, thumb just above the X button, heartbeat echoing in his temples. He knew. That folder had only contained one file when he clicked it, but now there were more. Jeremy didn't sleep again. Not properly, at least. After playing the first recording, his brain refused to rest. Even with the PS3 shut off and the controller unplugged, the sounds echoed in his mind. The wet tearing of flesh, the metallic scrape of tools, the whispered Latin prayers that didn't sound like they came from any game file he'd ever encountered. It was probably just an ARG, he told himself, a hidden mod or some fan project. That had gone too far. But the way the file ended, the way the folder title updated to Richtofen _log 1/12, like it had always known there would be more. It felt designed specifically for him. Or worse, it felt like it was reacting to him. The next morning, Jeremy decided he needed answers. He thought maybe he could dig into the console's hard drive and find the source of the files. Maybe he'd find a name or some leftover modding program. He turned on the PS3 with the intention of going to the system settings, but what happened immediately stopped him cold. The menu loaded with a faint, stuttering buzz. Nothing like the smooth Black Ops startup he'd memorized after hundreds of hours of zombies. This time, the Treyarch logo flickered, as if blinking rapidly. The Call of Duty Black Ops title screen stuttered 3 times before stabilizing, but it looked off, not graphically corrupted, not broken, but changed. The background no longer showed soldiers or war-torn imagery. It showed a single, dimly lit corridor lined with metal walls and pale blue fluorescent lights overhead. The camera slowly panned through the hallway, ending at a sealed surgical theater with blood smeared across the viewing window. Jeremy squinted. That wasn't normal. This wasn't some mod he downloaded, and it sure as hell wasn't How Black Ops open. He pressed start, and the usual main menu appeared. Campaign, multiplayer, zombies. But the background behind the Zombies tab was different now. It used to be a collage of static, snowy images with the characters from Kino der Toten. Now it showed something far more clinical and disturbing. It was a surgical room, brightly lit, too brightly. It's a kind of sterile white light that made everything feel more sinister. There were gurneys, trays of tools, clamps, wires dangling from the ceiling. A dark stain on the floor hinted at something dragged, something heavy and recently dead. The room had depth, and the more Jeremy stared at it, the more he felt like it wasn't just a static image, was a live feed, a camera feed, watching a real place. Then something moved. At first, it was just a flicker in the corner, like a light swinging. But as he watched, one of the zombies' characters appeared at the far end of the surgical room, standing with his back to the screen. It was Takayo, or maybe Nikolai. But then the character twitched and blinked out of existence. In a single frame. Jeremy waited, eyes glued to the screen, when the menu shifted again. Now it showed the Kino der Toten map selection screen. Normally, the background was dark and foreboding, with the theater stage and flickering lights. But this time, it was different. The camera still panned across the setting, but it had changed. The walls were now painted with medical symbols, and the theater seats were gone, replaced with surgical chairs. The stage? Completely replaced by a large operating table, surrounded by hooked for bags and jars filled with floating objects that looked alarmingly like preserved organs. And through the background speakers, barely audible under the sound design, was the distant echo of someone speaking in German again. Not dialogue, not scripted lines, just muttering, fast, erratic. Jeremy leaned in and caught only fragments, numbers, screams, laughter. It wasn't a voice file he recognized from Richtofen's in-game quotes. Then the menu glitched again. The screen froze for a half-second. Then the character select screen appeared, but it didn't behave normally. The four characters Dempsey, Richtofen, Takayo, Nikolai stood in their usual positions for only a few seconds before they started flickering. Each would vanish for a frame, replaced by a bloodied version of themselves slumped in the same position, eyes open but blank. When they reappeared, it was as if they never moved, standing stoic, holding their weapons. One by one, they blinked out of the menu entirely, until only Richtofen remained. His model stood slightly tilted forward, his mouth stretched in an unnatural smile. Then, without being selected, he turned his head slowly toward the screen, holding eye contact for a full 3 seconds before vanishing. The screen went black dot. Jeremy jumped. The menu music stopped completely. No sound, no interface, just black. After a long pause, the screen flickered back to the console's XMB home screen. But the folder had changed again. Richtofen_log 3/12. Jeremy hadn't played another file. He hadn't touched the folder. And yet, now it read 3/12. He opened it in a rush, trying to understand, and saw that there were indeed 3 audio files, now -log_001.wav, log_002.wav, and log_003.wav, bearing the same bland icon, each with no timestamp, no file size, and no option to delete. He backed out of the folder and just sat there, controller in hand. The room felt colder than before. Outside, the sunlight had dimmed behind clouds he hadn't noticed forming. Storm was coming. Or maybe something worse. He hadn't even listened to the second audio file yet, and somehow, the game already knew. Jeremy sat frozen in his chair, the controller loose in his grip, his eyes flickering between the PS3's menu and the now familiar folder, Richtofen_log 3/12. 3 audio files. He hadn't played the second or the third, not consciously, and yet they were there, existing, persistent, undeniable. It was early evening now, but the dim gray light outside could have been dawn or dusk, for all Jeremy cared. The days were beginning to blur. Curiosity gnawed at him, but so did a kind of instinctual fear, the same kind of primal discomfort that animals feel before a storm, or when staring into the eyes of something pretending to be human. Despite everything, he decided to do what he always did to calm his nerves: play zombies. He slid the Black Ops disc back in, put on his headset, and loaded up Kino der Toten, hoping stupidly that maybe the game would behave normally if he just ignored the files. But as the map loaded, the theater looked darker. Not in the usual atmospheric way, it was as if someone had turned down the gamma manually. Shadows pooled in corners, they didn't belong. The sound design was off too. The ambient music was missing, replaced by a low, irregular hum that made the speakers vibrate in a way that was almost subliminal. Jeremy tried to shake it off. He joined the game in solo mode, his headset on, mic muted, as always. He hadn't connected to Wi-Fi. He hadn't even plugged in an Ethernet cable. The console was offline, fully isolated. He'd checked 3 times, but 3 rounds in, something broke the rhythm. It wasn't the zombies. It wasn't the game's sound cues. It was laughter, high-pitched, playful, but wrong. It crackled suddenly into his left ear through the headset too close, like someone whispering directly against the microphone. Jeremy froze mid-movement. The laugh echoed again, followed by a slow inhale and then a low, deliberate whisper in German, Ich sei dich, kleiner Patient. Jeremy's skin went cold. He dropped the controller, yanked the headset off his ears, and threw it to the desk. The room went silent, except for the faint groaning of the zombies in-game. But then the voice returned, this time not in the headset. It came through the TV speakers. The exact same voice. The same tone, whispering again, as if it had simply changed channels. Ich sei dich, ... Jeremy stared at the screen. The game was still running, his character motionless in the spawn room. But now, the zombies weren't attacking. They circled slowly, almost reverently, their AI seemingly glitched. In the background, somewhere beyond the screen, the voice began breathing. It was subtle at first, deep patient inhales and slow, rattling exhales. Jeremy recognized the pattern instantly. It was human to human, not a soundbite, not a sound file. It felt real, as if someone were standing behind the microphone, not speaking, just watching. The breathing grew louder, rising and falling, in a tempo that seemed to match Jeremy's own panicked pulse. He scrambled to mute the TV, but the sound remained. It shouldn't have. His TV was analog, not smart. It didn't have background apps. No Bluetooth, no voice assistant. Yet the breathing continued. With trembling fingers, Jeremy exited the game and backed out to the PS3's XMB screen. For a brief moment, the interface appeared normal. Then the breathing stopped. Complete silence. Until the folder updated itself. Richtofen _log 4/12. The 4th audio file was there, blinking like a heartbeat. Jeremy didn't click it. He didn't have to. The system began playing it on its own. The screen darkened slightly, and the folder opened without input. log_004.wav launched with no warning. And the first thing Jeremy heard was breathing deep, measured, to clear. Then came the sound of footsteps, bare feet, slapping softly against tile. The pace was slow, uneven, deliberate, like someone pacing the length of a narrow room. Then the voice returned, quiet, deliberate, just above a whisper. Jeremy. It spoke his name, not his gamertag, not a random name, his Jeremy Davis. He had never logged into PSN. He had never synced an account. The console had no profile with his name on it. He hadn't even typed it in. The voice said it again, this time slower, almost lovingly, dragging out the syllables like a prayer. My. There was no mistaking it. The voice wasn't synthetic. It wasn't randomized. It knew him, knew how to say it, knew how to breathe between each syllable. Jeremy stood up, backing away from the desk, staring at the TV like it was something alive. His mouth was dry. His thoughts scrambled. He reached behind the console and physically yanked the power cord out of the wall. The screen died instantly. The room fell into dead silence. No fans, no hums, no whispers. For a few seconds, he stood there, heart racing, waiting for anything to happen. But nothing did, except for one final sound. Just as he turned to walk away, the headset, now unplugged, sitting idle on the desk, emitted a faint, sharp exhale, just once. As if someone on the other end had been holding their breath the entire time and had finally let go. Sleep stopped, feeling like rest. For the past 3 nights, Jeremy drifted off only to awaken drenched in sweat, pulse pounding in his ears, his dreams more vivid than anything he could explain. They always started the same way. A door creaked open to reveal a flickering overhead light, buzzing faintly, dangling by a wire that swayed even when there was no air. Beyond it, rows of cold steel tables glistened under weak fluorescence, and on them bodies, or things that had once been bodies. Some opened, some stitched halfway shut, others restrained with cracked leather straps, faces covered in old gas masks. He couldn't move in these dreams. Not really. He floated forward against his will, like his soul was being dragged by a force older than language. The walls were tiled in a sterile white, but stained brown streaks at the base, red blotches near the drains. Everything reeked of formaldehyde and metal. There were no doors to leave, only corridors that led deeper, spiraling into basements that didn't make sense. Once, he saw his own reflection in one of the hanging surgical lights. But it wasn't him. The person in the reflection had his face, but it was older, grayer, and smiling. Grinning, actually. The same grin from the game files. The same grin from the frame that flashed when he paused the game the day before. That morning, Jeremy awoke with the taste of blood in his mouth. His pillow was soaked. His nose had bled. Through the night, thick and dark, caking part of his face. His hands trembled when he reached for his phone to check the time. 3:11 a.m. The same time every night now. Always 3:11. He got up slowly, washed his face, and stared at himself in the bathroom mirror. The reflection blinked in sync with him, but something about the eyes felt slower, delayed, as if it was catching up. Not reflecting, mimicking. He didn't want to look too long. Back in his room, the PS3's red standby light blinked on. He hadn't touched the controller. The system was supposed to be unplugged. He had unplugged it, hadn't he? His heart pounded, hands clammy. He pressed the power button. The screen came alive with a hard click, like an old cathode monitor warming up. There was no startup chime, just static for a few seconds. Then, the usual PS3 interface. Except it wasn't usual. Jeremy blinked at the screen. The date in the top right corner no longer showed the correct day. Instead, it read 115, 115, 115ths. He stared at it, thinking maybe it was some sort of system bug. But no, this wasn't a glitch. It was deliberate. 115. The number hit him like a memory he didn't want. In the lore of COD Zombies element, 115 was the mysterious radioactive substance that reanimated the dead, the very foundation of everything Richtofen's experiments. The undead soldiers, the fractured dimensions. Jeremy navigated 2 system settings and tried to manually change the date. The moment he clicked the date tab, the console froze. Not just a typical freeze. The screen went black for 2 seconds, then began flashing images frames that lasted barely half a second each. Pictures from his room, pictures of his house, a blurred photo of him sleeping, and then a shadowed figure standing in his hallway, barely visible, almost part of the noise. His hand hovered over the power button, but before he could react, spilled a Richtofen _log 6/12 opened automatically. It didn't ask, it just played. The screen dimmed, a spinning loading icon in the shape of a broken Nazi eagle appeared briefly, and then the audio started. It was different this time, not just voices. This was an actual scene. Clinks of metal tools, a gurney being wheeled in, low mutterings in German, mostly indiscernible, except for the occasional clear word. Subject, Truman, Augen, off. Then came the sound of a surgical saw, screeching, wet. Jeremy covered his ears, but the sound wasn't just in the room. It was in the room, vibrating through the floor, coming from the TV, the console, the headset, all at once, as if the sound had weight. As if it wasn't being played, it was happening. A scream rang out, but it wasn't guttural like a horror movie. It was stifled, distant, coming from behind a mask. Then came the whisper again, the one from the last audio, the same voice, but angrier now, harsher, more knowing. Jeremy, Jeremy, du trugs nichts mehr. You're not dreaming anymore. The sound ended with a final mechanical click, like a recording being stopped manually. The console returned to the main menu, but everything was still frozen. His controller didn't respond. The screen was still dark. Then a final message blinked across the top of the screen, like a corrupted notification. Session 115 complete. Next entry, blood. Jeremy finally unplugged the system, again this time yanking every cord from the back, tossing the console onto his carpeted floor. But the TV screen remained lit. The PS3 was physically disconnected. And yet on the screen, for just a moment longer, the dates still glowed. 115, 115, 115s. Then it flickered. Then it was gone. Jeremy didn't turn the console back on for 2 days. After what happened with the 115 date and the recording that spoke his name, a cold, creeping fear had settled in his chest like mold in damp corners. He tried to tell himself it was just code, just corrupted files, maybe even some elaborate prank left behind by the previous owner. But every time he looked at the console, now placed on the far side of his desk with its cords unplugged and coiled like dead vines, he felt something watching, something patient, something that knew he'd be back. And on the third night, he was. Curiosity mixed with dread is a powerful thing, and the more he tried to distract himself, YouTube videos, music, even school assignments, the more he felt the gravitational pull of the console. It wasn't logical. He'd seen enough to know he should walk away, but part of him needed answers. So after midnight, when his mom had gone to bed, Jeremy reconnected the PS3 to the TV. The boot screen flashed like normal, though the background color had subtly changed, was now a sickly greenish tone, like the faded glow of tritium. The icons took longer to load, as if the console were reluctant or exhausted. Then the Richtofen _log folder blinked into place, but it looked different. The icon had changed from a simple folder to what looked like a red anatomical heart, not drawn, photographed, with stitches. There was a new file inside, log_img_1.avi. Jeremy stared at the file name, feeling a chill down his spine. The previous entries had all been audio logs. This was the first time it claimed to be a video. His thumb hovered over the X button for almost a full minute before he pressed it. The screen turned black for a moment, then filled with static, a thick wall of grayscale fuzz, occasionally flickering as if trying to form an image, but failing. A few seconds passed, and nothing changed. Then a sharp crack of audio cut through. The silence, like a microphone being violently jolted. Still static on the screen, but beneath it, there was something. A low hum, not mechanical, but vocal, like someone chanting under their breath. Jeremy raised the volume slightly. The chanting grew clearer Latin again, but slower, almost reverent. Domini, ... corpus. Then, for just a single frame, the static broke. A single image flashed, too fast for the average eye. But Jeremy saw enough. He dropped the controller. His breath caught in his throat. It was a photo of him, sleeping, taken from above. The angle showed his bed, the left side of his face pressed against the pillow, his chest rising slightly under the blanket. The camera had been directly above him at the ceiling, or maybe just a few feet higher. There was no one else in the shot, just him, in complete darkness, lit only by the soft glow of his bedside lamp. It had lasted less than a second, but the image had branded itself into his memory. Jeremy paused the video and scrubbed backward, frame by frame. At exactly the 0 hours, 6 minutes and 11 seconds mark, the frame appeared again. He stared at it, frozen. There was no timestamp, no metadata. Just that one still frame. Someone or something had recorded him. Not a digital recreation, not a game glitch. A real image. His room, his bed. He checked his phone. No camera access history. He checked his PS3's storage. No game had permission to record video like that. And he lived in a one-story house. There was no attic, no upstairs. Just his room and his mother's across the hall. Shaking, Jeremy unplugged the console once again. Then, with the image still fresh in his head, he went to his mom's room. It was almost 1 a.m. She was awake, watching something on her tablet, and looked surprised to see him. He asked, gently but directly, if she had ever touched his PS3, if she had ever downloaded anything, ever opened any folders. She looked at him like he'd gone mad. swore up and down that she'd never touched his system. She didn't even know how to turn it on, she said, and Jeremy believed her. She wasn't lying. But that left him with an even more terrifying truth. Someone else had, or something else had. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat with his back to the wall, the PS3 unplugged on the floor, and the controller face down like a dead insect. Every creak of the house made his heart jump. Every shadow on the wall seemed to ripple, as if reacting to something unseen. And, just before sunrise, his TV turned on by itself. No input, no HDMI. Just a blank screen. Then, faintly, a message appeared in the corner, half-glitched, like a corrupted file trying to render. Image saved, log_0002. Then the screen went dark again. The console had remained off for 3 more days. Jeremy had unplugged it and shoved it into the corner of his closet, beneath old shoes and a hoodie he never wore. Still, he felt its presence like a heartbeat pulsing behind the drywall, whispering in sleep-deprived dreams and clawing at his attention like a dying insect under glass. He kept seeing the image himself asleep, recorded from an impossible angle, in a frame buried inside a corrupted file. But the human mind does strange things when it seeks closure. Horror becomes curiosity, dread becomes obsession. And late, one night, as the wind rattled the kitchen windows and the house settled into its unnatural quiet, Jeremy plugged the console back in. His justification, whispered only to himself, was that he'd try something normal, something to break the pattern. He'd go online, maybe play with real people, maybe prove to himself that none of this was real, that it was just a glitch. He connected the PS3 to his Wi-Fi, which he hadn't done before, and for a moment the system seemed to hesitate, as if unsure it should proceed. But then it clicked in. No error messages. No strange audio, just a flickering PlayStation network, login and a system update prompt. He ignored the update and launched Call of Duty, Black Ops. The disc spun louder than usual, a mechanical growl, like a dentist's drill, echoing from inside the case. The title screen loaded, and the eerie green hue remained less vibrant now, like the color of bruised skin. Jeremy selected Zombies mode. The menu scrolled slowly. Find match. Searching. The screen blinked, then locked him into a game. The loading screen said Kino der Toten, but the player list didn't make sense. There was only one other name, Richtofen _935. Jeremy stared at it, uncertain if it was a modder or someone trying to scare him. The numbers were familiar. 935 was the group from the game's lore, the ones who built the teleporters, the experiments, the madness. But there was no mic icon, no player avatar, just the name in gray text, flickering. The map loaded, no countdown, no intro cinematic. The screen faded in slowly, like an old tape being played in reverse. He was in the theater, Kino der Toten, but it wasn't right. The textures were off walls, looked too real, too damp. Blood spatters were fresh and glistening. The lighting was dimmer, almost like a real projector bulb struggling to stay alive. And there was no sound, no music, no ambiance. Just a low, wet, surgical squelch in the distance. Jeremy moved his character forward, noting the absence of HUD elements. No points, no weapon name, no objective. He turned a corner and stopped. The other player was standing still in the lobby, perfectly still, not idle, not AFK, just staring. The character model was Richtofen. Of course, the classic Nazi doctor. But something was wrong with the skin. It wasn't the default version. The face was glossier, more lifelike, with bloodshot eyes that shimmered in the darkness. The model's mouth twitched slightly, and its hands jittered at its sides like marionette limbs waiting for a signal. Jeremy tried speaking through the mic. Nothing. Silence. He shot his pistol once into the air. No response. He walked in front of the other player. Still no response. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the Richtofen avatar turned its head. Its body, just the neck toward the camera. It didn't look at Jeremy's character. It looked directly at him, through the screen, like it could see him, as if it always had. Jeremy froze. The sound returned. Not music, not gameplay. Breathing, shaky, hollow breathing like from an old cassette left too close to the sun. Then came the sound of metal tools scraping, a scalpel, or maybe a bone saw, followed by a muffled whimper. The map remained empty. No zombies, no mystery boxes. Just the echoes of suffering. Jeremy tried to pause, but the menu wouldn't open. He pressed the PlayStation button to return to the home screen, but the console froze. The only thing still moving was the Richtofen avatar, who now blinked. A full, deliberate blink. Not part of the animation cycle. Just once, as if acknowledging him. Jeremy stood up, grabbed the controller, and disconnected from the match. The screen went black. Then it rebooted to the menu, back to the zombie screen. But now, something had changed. The name Richtofen_935 was in his recent players list. When he tried to view the profile, the system gave an error. This user does not exist. The recent players tab now showed no matches. But the name still burned in his memory. That, and the blinking eyes. Not in the game. In the screen. Watching. Always watching. Sleep had become impossible. Jeremy no longer saw dreams-only fragments of things that felt more like memories that didn't belong to him. Hands soaked in blood, voices behind walls, circular rooms with operating tables. The console had been unplugged again, but that didn't stop the static in his ears or the sensation of something watching him from corners he couldn't look directly into. He needed answers. He couldn't talk to his mother. She already thought he was slipping into some kind of obsession. And maybe he was. But the events surrounding the console were too specific, too personal, and too deeply wrong to ignore. So, late one night, when the house was silent and every sound felt like a threat, Jeremy turned to something he had only read about before: the deep web. Not just browsing forums or conspiracy sites. He used Tor, found access to old archive threads from dead forums, places that had long since vanished from normal search engines. It took him hours. Most links were broken. Some loaded endless code or infected his browser with ads. But eventually, he found it. A thread called the 115 Diaries, Mind Control Through Memory Playback. Archived from 2012. The forum had been wiped clean years ago, but someone had preserved a few pieces through screenshots and plain text files. The original poster claimed to be a former QA tester for Treyarch, fired before the release of Black Ops 2. He spoke of an internal build never meant for public, used nicknamed version 115. According to his notes, it was a psychological test designed by request of an unnamed military client. It wasn't just about zombies or gameplay. It embedded specific subliminal sequences into the audio monologues of Edward Richtofen, played in certain orders under specific conditions. The files would begin altering perception, creating false memories, inducing sleep disturbances, even implanting real pain responses when combined with visual triggers. At first, Jeremy laughed. It was absurd, classic deep web urban legend. But the more he read, the colder his spine became. One image, buried in the thread, showed a folder from an early PS3 dev kit. The file names Richtofen_log01.wav through log08.wav, the exact same pattern that had appeared on his console. Another post described how the ritual only became active when the player ignored progression and instead listened to the logs in order. During full moon cycles, that detail hit too close. The night he first played, the moon had been full. He remembered it through the blinds. How the light looked like a camera flash, frozen in the sky. One user, long deleted, mentioned that the logs formed a spoken ritual, designed not for the player, but for whatever entity the developers were trying to contact. The term Echoesen appeared German for echo being, a creature of memory and sound, a consciousness that could embed itself inside recordings and reproduce by being heard. It wasn't a virus. It wasn't a ghost. It was repetition, incarnate. Jeremy's mind reeled. He remembered the phrase from one of the audio files, the whisper behind the static that kept repeating, HR Mitch, Aranor Mitch, Word Mitch, hear me, remember me, become me, a line of the ritual. Apparently, he wasn't just a player. He was now a vessel. The forum's final message was what struck him hardest. It was a screenshot of a handwritten page, labeled translation of Richtofen_log08. The last lines read, "The patient accepts the truth of the theater. The show must go on. Identity is no longer yours. You belong to 935. At the bottom of the page, barely legible, was a scribbled note in red ink. If you hear your name, it's already too late. Jeremy sat frozen. That had already happened. In the last audio, the one after the headset incident. His full name spoken in that gasping, rasping voice. He shut the laptop and stared at the wall, heart pounding, fingers twitching. He felt like he'd read something forbidden, opened a door no one should know exists. And worse, he didn't feel alone in his own head anymore. Something had changed in the silence. There was no noise in the house, but still, he heard breathing, not his own. A different rhythm, patient, observing. Jeremy reached for the console, fingers trembling, unsure whether to destroy it or dive deeper, 'cause the next file had just appeared on its own, labeled simply, patient_log 10, accept. The nights had taken on a different weight in the house. Not just the usual silence of suburbia, wrapped in distant barking dogs or the hum of a refrigerator, but something more deliberate, like the house itself was holding its breath. After everything he had read and heard, Jeremy had unplugged the PS3, wrapped it in a towel, and stuffed it in his closet beneath a pile of old clothes and boxers. Yet, despite this, the audio returned, not in dreams, not in hallucinations, but audibly real and unmistakable. It began 2 nights after he'd found the deep web forum. A familiar metallic hiss, the old startup buzz of the PS3, and then that voice again, distorted and playful. Willkommen Zurich, Kleiner Patient. The sound came from the living room. He ran from his room, heart pounding, only to find the television off. Dead black screen. No input. No glow. He stood frozen for nearly a full minute, the last syllables still echoing inside his skull. The next day, he told himself it had to be in his head. Maybe stress, maybe fatigue. But it happened again the next night. And this time, he wasn't the only one who noticed. His mother was the first to bring it up. She asked if he had left something playing on the TV. Jeremy said no. She looked at him for a long second, hesitant, then said she had heard laughing. A child's laugh followed, by a man's voice speaking in a language she didn't understand. She thought maybe it was German, but the tone was wrong, too sharp, too gleeful. The word Samantha had been repeated. She said, he lied, told her maybe it was a YouTube video that autoplayed or something from his phone. But he knew she didn't believe him, neither did he. The next incident was physical. Objects began to shift. A photo of him and his mother fell from the wall 3 times. She replaced the hook, changed the frame, tried new anchors. Still, it fell, and always with the glass shattering inward. Her keys vanished from the counter and appeared in the bathroom sink, soaked. Lights flickered, but only in his room. Then, something worse. Jeremy began waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing across the hallway outside his room. He lived alone with his mother, and she always slept with the door shut and locked. When he finally worked up the courage to open the door during one of those nights, the hallway was empty, but the TV downstairs was on. Again, that same static, and again, a whisper through the noise. Samantha is watching. It said the phrase slowly, carefully, like a mantra being burned into the walls. He shut it off and unplugged it from the wall. The next morning, his mother refused to speak to him. She looked pale, her eyes bloodshot. When he asked what was wrong, she said she'd seen someone standing at the foot of her bed, a man in a white lab coat, face covered in shadow. She thought it was a dream, until she woke up fully and found muddy footprints in the carpet. Then came the final sign. One night, around 3:15 a.m., Jeremy woke up not because of sound, but because of heat. The room felt like it was boiling. He sat up and immediately noticed that his mirror, the large rectangular one hanging on his closet door, was fogged up, completely, as if someone had been breathing on it from inches away. He approached slowly, confused and afraid, and saw that a message had been written in the condensation. It wasn't in his handwriting. It wasn't even smudged with a finger, but rather scratched into the fog, like claws had etched through the steam. For words, Samantha is watching you. But there was more. Dripping below the writing was something thicker than water, Red, dark. It pooled slightly on the floor. He touched it. Sticky, not paint. It reeked of iron. He backed away in horror. Unable to speak, the smell clung to the air for days, even after scrubbing the mirror clean. His mother never mentioned it, but she stopped entering his room after that night. Jeremy stopped sleeping. Every creak of the house was a voice now. Every light flicker, a signal. He knew the house wasn't just haunted, was infected by something ancient, technological, and intelligent. Something that spoke through electricity, that fed on memory and fear. And the worst part, the console was still off, still unplugged. And yet, every night, the sounds returned. Every night, the voice got louder. Every night, the phrase echoed, "Samantha is watching." He had avoided opening the final file in the Richtofen_log folder for nearly a week. Every day, he stared at it, the way someone might glance at a coffin they knew was still breathing inside. It was named simply end_01.wav, and unlike the others, its metadata read, modified 115 to 3:15 a.m. The same impossible date, the same time he always woke up in a sweat. The icon of the file had changed too. Once a generic audio symbol, it now showed a flickering waveform icon, unstable, like it was caught mid-glitch. He knew something would happen the moment he clicked it. But after the writing on the mirror, the voices, the nightly visitations, the lines between game and life had been so deeply crossed that hesitation began to feel pointless. With headphones over his ears, shaking hands, and a dry mouth, he clicked play, silence, then static. Then slowly, the low hum of electricity, followed by the creaking of wheels on a tile floor. Somewhere in the background, a slow, methodical beep, like a heart monitor, footsteps. Then, that unmistakable voice, Richtofen. But this time, it didn't speak immediately. It giggled, quietly at first, then building into something unhinged, like a child who had been laughing so long it turned into crying. After nearly 30 seconds, he began speaking in German, slow and methodical. Jeremy didn't understand most of it, but the tone was surgical, purposeful. Words like patient and experiment appeared often. But it was when the phrases in Latin began that the room shifted, not physically, but atmospherically. A pressure, a density in the air. He felt watched, not just by something behind him, but inside the audio itself. The Latin gave way to prayers. A woman's voice, broken, reciting Pater Noster while sobbing. Then more German, from another voice, this time. A man, possibly. Restrained, the audio peaked and clicked, and then silence. Dead silence, for a full 12 seconds. Then it began, a whisper. Right ear only. Jeremy, then middle name, then last name. Slowly, carefully, as if tasting the syllables. Not read from a document, not guessed. Spoken correctly, precisely, like it knew him. His blood ran cold. He had never connected the PS3 to the internet. He had never signed into PlayStation Network. He had never given the console his real name. And yet, here it was, whispered with clinical delight. He tore off the headphones, but the voice continued, now from the speakers. As if the console had bypassed hardware itself, it repeated his name 2 more times, each slower than the last, almost savoring it. Then, finally, came the last line, spoken not in a whisper, but a clear, unwavering tone. Du bist bereit. Das Spiel beginnt jetzt. The screen flickered. The entire room pulsed. Light bulbs dimmed and returned. And when he looked back at the TV, there was no game, no menu, just a black screen with one new line in crimson text, centered and pulsing, with static glitch trails. Level 935. Status. Online. Underneath, a button prompt. Press X to continue. The controller vibrated violently in his hand. Not a soft pulse like usual, but a deep, rhythmic tremor, like it was alive, like it was breathing. The console still never connected to the internet was displaying network activity. His PS3 username was gone, replaced with test_subject_JR. The audio continued, now a heartbeat. Not in the game, not in his ears, but in the walls. The same rhythm of the files beeping, syncing, matching his own pulse. He tried to unplug the console, but it didn't turn off. He held the power button for 10 seconds. Nothing. The image remained. Then his TV blinked. For a split second, it showed an image. Him, not as he was, but sleeping. In real time, from above, from the ceiling, in his room. He turned around so fast, he fell. Nothing there. The ceiling was clean. But when he looked back, the PS3 was off. Truly off. The room returned to silence. The file gone. The folder empty. But now, every time he turned on the console, it booted not to the PlayStation menu, but straight into Black Ops. Always the same map, Kino, always solo, but with one player already loaded into the session, Richtofen _935, and every match. That voice returned, not overcomes. But in his head, they found the house exactly how the neighbors described it: silent, undisturbed, but with all the lights on. No forced entry, no broken windows. Just a bedroom door locked from the inside, and no answer when they knocked. The mother had returned from her overnight shift early that morning and called the police immediately when her son didn't respond. He never left the house without telling her. He never locked the door. When they finally pried it open, the room was ice cold. It's a sharp contrast to the early summer heat outside. There was no body, no blood, no mess. But everything felt wrong. The TV screen was black, but faint lines of static still flickered at the bottom, as if something had just shut off seconds before. The PS3 sat in its place on the floor, melted from the inside out, not scorched, not exploded, just warped, like the internal components had been cooked by something not of this world. The exterior was intact. No fire damage on the carpet. No burn marks on the plug. The HDMI cable was fused into the port, as if the heat had come from deep within. A faint metallic smell lingered in the aeronaut smoke, something more sterile, like a hospital or a morgue. His headset was on the floor, the mic bent as though it had been clenched too tightly. On the TV stand sat the game case for Black Ops, closed but cracked along the spine. When one of the officers opened it, he found something strange tucked behind the manual, a hand-drawn image on loose-leaf paper in pencil. It was a rough sketch of the Kino der Toten Theater map, but there were details never seen in the actual game: an open surgical theater behind the stage, rows of tables with restrained figures, and a hallway labeled Subject Archive, Level 935. In the far corner of the drawing, a tiny scribbled figure stood alone, circled in red ink, with the name Jeremy written in block letters beneath it. There was no note, no message, no sign of where the boy had gone. His phone was still on the desk, battery drained, no calls, no texts, just one open file in the audio recorder app entitled 115 long, corrupted and unable to play. The mirror on the closet door held the only message, written in thick, smeared red letters that looked like they had been applied with fingers or perhaps the corner of a controller grip. The phrase read, "Inside the console, time doesn't move forward." The writing matched the same unsteady, looping cursive found in the folder Richtofen _log. The reflection of the room in the mirror was slightly off. Officers noted that the angle seemed skewed, an uncanny trick of the eye, perhaps, but enough to unsettle every person who entered. The reflection showed the bed unmade when it wasn't. The reflection showed the controller on the chair when it was actually on the floor. One officer claimed the reflection showed a figure standing behind them, tall and hazy, just before the lights flickered and went out. Power was restored moments later, but nothing worked quite right afterward. The console was taken for analysis. The tech team couldn't recover anything from the hard drive. It was completely wiped, but not in the conventional sense, like a space erased, not by software, but by absence, as if something had vacuumed the data out of existence. The BIOS had been corrupted, with a hexadecimal pattern repeating endlessly: 115935, 115935. Sony denied any known firmware version capable of producing the boot behaviors observed on site. They also confirmed that the console had never once connected to PSN. No user ID, no logins, no MAC address history. It was a ghost device. No record of ownership. Jeremy was never found. No fingerprints other than his and his mother's existed. In the house, No prints on the melted console. No heat source to explain the damage. But every night since then, the bedroom remained cold. The mother eventually moved out after claiming she heard whispering through the old HDMI cable left plugged into the back of the television. She donated the TV. The police sealed the console in evidence. But according to internal reports, the evidence locker where it was stored experienced strange electrical malfunctions for 3 consecutive nights until the hard drive was removed. That drive has never been recovered. It disappeared during transfer, the logs unreadable, corrupted into blank pages. 1 year later, a used PS3 appeared in a pawn shop 3 towns over. It booted normally. No files, no folder. But when left idle, it displayed a black screen for a few seconds, followed by the same message. Flickering red. Level 935 status. Test subject confirmed. No one bought it. No one could turn it off without unplugging the power. And, in the reflection of the TV, for a single flicker, there was always a boy, standing, watching, just before the screen went dark.